So thanks everybody for coming tonight. Thank you, Paola, for spending the evening with us. And I think you're going to do a lecture for a little while, and then hopefully there'll be some time for some Q&A and discussion. And please welcome Paola Antonelli. Yeah.
Definitely, we will make time. And thank you so much, Alan, for the introduction. Definitely, it's a crucial time for design because it's a crucial time for the world. And every time the going gets tough, the tough get going, you know, the adage. And designers are so versatile and so resilient. I shouldn't use the word resilience because Alice Rawsthorne, my sister and partner in crime, just told me yesterday that it's overused. I'm like, whenever she says something, I listen. But still, let's talk about resilience tonight. I think that designers are truly tough cookies because they know how to get their hands dirty, how to get really involved in the world and still maintain grace or at least a sense of elegance, whether it's intellectual or formal. And they manage to sway the world that way. You know, they are able to influence behaviors using tools, using services, using interfaces. I'm always in awe of designers. So I'm in awe of you because you are designers. And by choosing to attend this particular course, you want to shape yourself to be even more deadly than other designers can be. So it's a pleasure to speak with you. And indeed, tonight I will talk about design emergency, and even more so, I will talk about the fact that there is always a design emergency. So let me go to my screen, start sharing it with you, and start showing you what I mean by that. So there is always a design emergency. That's the truth. I mean, we have been able to see it right now with COVID-19. We have been able to see it also with other major events that have happened from the beginning of the pandemic and throughout the pandemic, ranging from the Black Lives Matter protests to the fires in California to the elections. I mean, all of these, this year has been so difficult and so full of things that have happened that there's been one emergency after the other. But the truth is, design is always involved in anything that happens. And it's always also there when some of the toughest occurrences in our life as individuals and as societies happen. So I'm going to go back before I get to really speak about design emergency. I'm going to go back to a project from a few years ago that was about design and violence. That's one of the first instances, maybe not the first, because already many years ago, in 1999, I was working on a project on an exhibition called Emergency, which then was kind of put on pause by 9/11, right? So it's not the first time that I see design that way. It became then an exhibition about safety called Safe, how design is about safety. But a few years ago, when Cody Wilson came up with this idea of the 3D printed gun, and therefore managed to put online and make completely open source the files to print a lethal gun with a 3D printer at home, I remember that at that time, I really remained completely shocked by the fact that design can have the power not only to help in cases of emergency, but also to create emergencies. It's something that I had never thought about before, that design can be evil, that design is not always for the good of everyone, that design is not always for the betterment of society. And because of that, in 2013, together with a great colleague with whom I always love conducting projects, Jamer Hunt, we started this program that was called Design and Violence. And we proposed an exhibition to MoMA. MoMA said, no, not really as an exhibition, it doesn't really work, which I understand now in hindsight. And that pushed Jamer and me to start a website, because that's what you do when you don't want to ask anybody's money or permission, you start a WordPress site. So every other week, first with a great collaborator named Kate Carmody, and then another great collaborator called Michelle Millar-Fisher. We started posting every so often a different object that gave us a different insight on what violence means in contemporary society. In other words, we used ambiguous objects like the 3D printed gun, arguably lethal, evil, but at the same time wondrous, an amazing use of 3D printing, a cry for the freedom of the internet and of open source. So ambiguity matters. We use these objects to understand the manifestations of violence in contemporary society, because violence has changed. Violence is really subtle and uh, and uh, and well, in Italy we say subdola and sneaky and snaky, in the sense that it's able to follow society almost magically. So this program was really quite powerful, and it went on for a few years, about 2 years. So you can see here, it's still online if you want to see it, but these are some of the objects that we posted. I'm talking about ambiguity, like the Toyota 4x4. It started out as being a utilitarian car, utility vehicle for farmers, for anybody that had a tough job to do. But it became, after a while, the car for narco traffickers and for guerrillas in civilian wars. So really interesting how things can go either way. Or the blue bra that became a symbol of the Arab Spring. You might remember the woman that was covered in a veil and that was being dragged away from Tahrir Square by the police, and they, by mistake, almost like pulled away her sweater, and it revealed this blue bra, and the blue bra became almost like the symbol of the Arab Spring Revolution. Or other examples where you can see it here better. It was like pretty much everywhere on the streets of Cairo to signify this revolution that was going on. Or you see the ambiguity of objects like the box cutter that became apocryphal, because nobody's really sure that it truly happened that way, but it became the symbol of 9/11 because it allegedly, the hijackers used box cutters to threaten and to actually overwhelm both flight attendants and also the pilots. So all of these different symbols that become a way to understand violence in contemporary society. Another example, for instance, is also this beautiful, the $1 Million Blocks by Laura Kurgan and Architecture and Justice. This is an institute at Columbia University. So design and violence is not only objects that provoke violence or that defend from violence, but also objects, graphic design in this case, or communication design, that highlight violence. This is a beautiful work that speaks about blocks, in this case in Brooklyn, but they exist in many different cities in the United States, where the local government, the city and state government, spend more than $1 million a year for each block to keep some of the block's inhabitants either in prison or in halfway houses. So you see here this kind of red, blood red on black. You see this map of entropy, of the people that are kept out of society instead of being reintegrated. So all of these different facets of violence, they are also signifiers of emergency. Or here you can also see other great examples. One is, well, there's this poster about female genital mutilation for Amnesty International that was quite beautiful. But one that has become quite famous because this year it was realized was this Border Wall as Architecture by Ronald Rael and Virginia Sanfratello, two architects that are in San Jose, who at that time had only hypothesized this idea of responding to the border wall. I mean, Trump was not president yet, but already there were talks of a wall at the border, and actually between Tijuana and San Diego, there's a little piece of a wall. But so they were talking about treating this violent cut that frontier wall represented by having these playful connections between the two different states. And this year it actually did happen for just a few hours, because then the Border Patrol stopped them. They were able to install these seesaws between Ciudad Juarez in Mexico City, in the state of Mexico, and instead New Mexico, the US state. So it lasted only a few hours, but it was really powerful. And of course, it went viral, a symbol of how you can also overcome violence in some cases. The website went on, as I mentioned to you, for I think a year and a half or more. And MoMA, after kind of rejecting the idea, instead took it on in the MoMA website and even published a book about it that we wrote. And we wanted to also touch all the different facets of violence. So in a way, it was coming from different directions. On the one hand, the object spoke to us, but on the other hand, there were topics that we wanted to speak about. And in that case, we looked for the objects. For instance, we wanted to talk about the death penalty. To so many of us, it is just unconscionable an act, an unconscionable a law, and a punishment that can be justified by a legal system. So we wanted to end the whole series with this, but it was very hard to find an object, because I told you about ambiguity. Ambiguity means you don't choose the electric chair, you don't choose the gas chamber. There's no ambiguity there. But maybe midazolam, it's a little bit of a stretch to consider a medication design, but we try to make it work for the purpose. Midazolam is the one drug that has been considered acceptable, as crazy as that might seem, as an only drug when the cocktail of 3 drugs is not available, because so many companies refuse to sell medications for this particular use. No kidding. So midazolam, which normally is an anesthetic, becomes the lethal injection drug. Ambiguity, therefore. And we had, as in any other entry, we had always an essay by somebody that is knowledgeable of this particular topic, right? There's always a curatorial cap, and then there's the essay. And in this case, the essay was by Ricky Jackson, who was on death row for almost 30 years before he was completely declared innocent, because finally DNA was available to be tested. So one doesn't think that design can be so brutally honest, so useful to understand some of the most hidden and or the most violent aspects of society. There are so many people still that think that design is decoration. And it always drives me crazy, because when I get asked about chairs, not that there's anything wrong with chairs, but chairs, cars, the normal stereotypes of design, of course, they exist, but there is a whole universe. And I think that situations of emergencies like the one that we've just been through really help people understand how completely diverse and wide-ranging design is. We started also acquiring in the exhibition several of these design objects that have such an interesting way to highlight states of emergency or unpretty aspects of society. We have acquired also some video games. For instance, this one that's by 11-Bit Studios that's called This War of Mine. In war, not everyone is a soldier. So basically, it's a game, a first-person game, in which the player, instead of being as usual a soldier, it's a civilian trying to stay alive. It's a city that is under siege. 2 parties are waging war, and civilians are trying to stay alive. So powerful, right? And even in this case, it's a design What's going on? I hear a lot of noises that are a little distracting. So I'm wondering if you could all like mute yourselves. I would appreciate it because I'm trying to give you my best performance. Thank you. So it really is interesting how designers sometimes have this ability of looking at things from another angle and all of a sudden changing everybody's behaviors. Another video game that we have not acquired yet, but I think we will acquire in the spring, so don't tell anyone. It's Lucas Pope's Papers, Please, in which you are a Homeland Security, now ICE, border agent, and you have to ask people to give you the documents, and then you decide whether to give them asylum or not. Go figure that. So you can see how powerful that can be, how it's a design that is definitely stronger than one is used to. Other entries in the MoMA collection that I think are very important to highlight here mark different moments of emergency in the world. The most recent acquisition is Mohammed Fayyaz, the poster for Papi Juice that we just acquired. I think it was about 2 weeks ago. It was a poster that called for everybody to show up on June 14th in front of the Brooklyn Museum in order to talk about, in order to put together a big protest for trans Black Lives Matter movement. And that came in the collection quite recently, but in past years, we also acquired the ACT UP poster, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, Silence Equals Death from 1987, which was about the AIDS crisis and the fact that the government refused, Ronald Reagan refused for a very long time to even name the AIDS with its own name. And also we have in the collection the Black Panthers magazine, by Emory Douglas. So there's a lot of different representations of emergency that are in the MoMA collection, as they are in the collection of the Cooper Hewitt and in all other museums' collections, because design is often about marking that kind of emergency. So you see here the Brooklyn Liberation poster by Mohammed Fayyaz, the one that called everybody to show up at the Brooklyn Museum on June 14th. So Broken Nature was another example of, in a way, activism. You can be an activist as a designer, you can be an activist as a curator. Everybody tries in their own way. Activism can be very quiet or it can be very loud. And we all do our part. I think there's hardly anyone I know in the design world that doesn't think that design is a form of politics. I don't want to hear bings anymore. Is there a way to not have them? Elspeth, any chance?
Yes, I'm so sorry. I'm trying to figure it out. It's the notifications of people joining.
I know. Okay, it's okay. All right, I'll try.
I'll try and work on it. So sorry.
Thank you. That's okay. Thanks a lot. So Broken Nature, which now is in the galleries of MoMA in a very reduced format, was the 22nd Triennale di Milano. I don't know how many of you have been to Milano, that's my city. And the Triennale is this gorgeous building that was built for architecture and design exhibitions. And I started my whole career there, really when I was in my 20s. I was a gopher for an exhibition. So I know the building, I know the smell, and I was just in heaven when they asked me to take care of the 22nd Triennale, because it's a building that was born to host these triennial expos. They're expos like the one you had in Shanghai and Osaka. So they're expos that have a theme that is given by the curator, a main exhibition, and then pavilions, pretty much like the Biennale of Venice. And so when they asked me to put together the 22nd Triennale, I chose a topic that was really important to me. So important, in fact, that I had proposed it to MoMA in 2013. And even in that case, MoMA said, not yet. I have this whole string of great rejections that then lead to something else. Don't ever get discouraged, people. You know, rejections are okay. There's always a way to do what you really want to do. So I proposed the exhibition to the Triennale. It's called Broken Nature, and it's exactly about the broken threads and the different kind of threads that connect humans to the rest of nature. And it really speaks about that. And it was a whole exhibition that spoke about how we can repair some of those threads, the ones that are not completely irreversibly severed, and how we can live in a more responsible way, right? This idea of restorative design that we advanced. And when I say we, I mean also my colleagues. You know, I had a curatorial team that was fantastic with also Ala Tanir, Laura Mairan, and Erica Petrillo. We wanted to advance this idea of restorative design and talk about the fact that in order to be more responsible, there's no need to sacrifice everything. You know, there's no need to sacrifice pleasure, formal elegance, humor. One can be seriously responsible and respectful towards other beings and the whole planet without completely atoning and self-flagellating. So you're looking here at the catalog of the exhibition, and this is the catalog. Imagine it completely open and spread. It's a glacier in Switzerland that every summer needs to be covered with fabric to prevent erosion. You see the person here that is climbing. So what have we gotten to that we have to cover glaciers? Because we have raised the temperatures to such an extent that if we don't cover it, it's going to melt faster. So really it goes to tell you that we have created a situation that is quite untenable. And Broken Nature was really seeking to inspire by showing both the terrifying reality of change that is happening and the terrifying reality that we will become extinct. And actually I started gingerly my whole discussion about the exhibition saying that it's a fact, we will become extinct. Might as well plan a really elegant extinction and design it well so that there will be a legacy and the next dominating species will remember us with some kind of respect. So it was at the same time about highlighting the terrifying aspects of Broken Nature and also the kind of heartening and hopeful aspect of how much we can do if we really set our heart to it to make things better and maybe postpone a little bit our extinction and certainly make it better, make it count. So Broken Nature meant to inspire, meant to scare perhaps, meant to really stimulate a conversation. And you see here the entrance to the exhibition with a gorgeous graphic design by Anna Kulacek. And immediately you were greeted by these images of change. And you might see them if you walk on 53rd Street. We have a screen on the outside, well, facing outside, and we also show these images. You can also watch them anytime you want online. It's a website, NASA Images of Change. They're in the public domain, God bless them. And they show the before and after of different parts of the world, before and after change that can be either human-made or just naturally occurring. And the before and after could be like a century away from each other, or they could be just a few days. So nonetheless, it shows that change is real. There are so many people that deny change as happening, and instead it is real and it can be shown by these satellite pictures. And in the background, it's hard to really go into details in it right now, but it's a beautiful mural. There was a commission for the exhibition by Accurat, in particular by Giorgia Lupi, who now is at Pentagram, but at that time was still Accurat, that puts in connection changes, big changes and big transformations in human history, and puts them in connection with big transformation instead in the rest of nature, you know, in the universe or in the planet. When I say the rest of nature, it's because one of the biggest points that we were trying to make with this exhibition is almost like we like to say in Italy, the discovery of hot water, right? So it was about saying we are part of nature. It's not us versus them. it's us versus ourselves. What we do to nature, we do to ourselves. And it's a very important concept. And even though to you it might seem obvious, to so many people, it's not. It's very much, I don't know if it's generational, but definitely it's something that was not as clear a few years ago. So this was the entrance of the exhibition, and I'm not going to take you through it all, but I wanted to give you the modulation because it then moved into the kind of like micro activism that we can have as product designers. So there's the macro activism that is about highlighting change, that is about trying to give people a sense of time. And this is really what my co-curators and I wanted to do. We wanted to make this exhibition, which is an exhibition for citizens, be a way to let them understand the length of time. But we also wanted everybody that came to the exhibition to leave the exhibition with an idea of what they could do in everyday life. So you might not think that a Ruby cup is activism, and you might not think that a biodegradable pregnancy test is activism, or that a poster that is almost like a Heimlich maneuver poster, but it's about teaching doctors that women talk about heart attack in a different way than men, because too many women die of heart attack because doctors don't realize that it's a heart attack. So you might think that this is not activism, but I think it is, and that's exactly the point. Anybody can be an activist. Anybody can be a restorative designer. Anybody can be an upright citizen just by making small changes and small adjustments and be more observing in their own life. And that's what we wanted the exhibition to be, you know, at the same time, really corroborating and inspiring, but also non-intimidating, because we wanted to make sure that there would be a consequence to a visit to broken nature. There were beautiful examples also of how to be restorative. When we talk about restorative design and we say that there's no need to self-flagellate, we also presented various strategies. You know, being sustainable or responsible can happen in many different ways. You can use less, you can recycle, you can buy something and make it last for your whole life. You can transform fast fashion into slow fashion. You can apply a circular model to everything that you do. So there are so many different ways. And among the various strategies, there was also, for instance, this one of considering waste, not waste, but another material, right? So Forma Fantasma, fabulous. I'm sure you already know about them. Made this beautiful project. There was a commission for the exhibition that talked about the electronic waste cycle, which is really very dark, has a very dark underbelly of indentured labor, toxic waste, exploitation of countries, especially in Southeast Asia, where all the crap coming, the electronic crap coming from the West ends up, you know, there's the other craps end up elsewhere, but electronic crap gets there. So these beautiful objects that you see here, which might be like the most fabulous Italian design shown at the Salone del Mobile, in truth are all made of electronic waste. And they were just ways to attract the Italian sensibility, which is all for this kind of formal elegance, and instead drive them to listen to these interviews with people that try to do something about the criminal overlayer to this whole industry. So it's almost like investigative design that shows that waste is a problem, is an opportunity, is something that we need to address. Another goal of the exhibition, I told you about the goal of giving citizens a sense of long time, the goal of giving citizens ideas of what to do in their everyday life. And there was also this goal of letting them all understand that we live in systems, that not every action has a reaction. Every action has reverberations, and sometimes they're hard to really understand or hard to predict. But one needs to think that there's a ricochet effect, that it's not that simple. So we showed in that case several objects of design that had this systemic kind of breadth to themselves. Forensic oceanography is part of forensic architecture. In a way, it's another form of investigative design, and actually they were the first and most well known. It's a group of architects and researchers that are based at Goldsmiths University in London that have decided to put their skills as architects at the service of international tribunals, of all sorts of investigations happening, from investigations trying to understand if a drone killed a family in Palestine, or in this particular case, it was a boat from a German NGO that had saved some migrants in the Mediterranean that were about to drown and had been accused by the Italian tribunals of helping the human traffickers. So forensic oceanography proved, by using all these tools that you can see, from graphic projections, modeling, to prove that no, it was not true, that the boat was not going back to, was not going away after having helped the traffickers. Rather, it was going back to Libya to pick up more migrants to save them. So it was really a way to show how not everything that you see is exactly what you see. Another great example is Anatomy of an AI System by Kate Crawford, who's a researcher in AI. She actually funded an institute about AI called AI Now at New York University. And Vladan Joler, who's a really great designer and programmer. They kind of mapped out everything that is behind both the hardware and the software of an Amazon Echo. Now, Amazon just changed the design, so something might have changed in the hardware part, but it was about understanding that mining and extraction happen both in the real world, in the physical world, and in the intellectual world. So it's almost like an X-ray of what's behind an Amazon Echo, and it's quite damning and incredibly interesting. So AI is another big discussion. But so you see, long time, everyday life, systems, real restoration. And then there were also a few other examples of a different kind of activism. Now, Alan knows this project. Anybody who knows me knows this project, because I have been using it for so many years and I almost risked being fired about it, but I've always loved it so much. Now, today we talk about menstruation quite easily. It's a discussion that happens often, and you see menstruation underwear advertised on the subway train. It's not that big of a deal anymore. In 2010, it was a big deal. And Sputniko, this great British-Japanese artist, musician, and also mathematician and designer, had done this beautiful object called the Menstruation Machine. And she actually is here wearing a prototype. It's her, but she's impersonating a boy that wants to try being a woman. But basically, this machine enables people that cannot menstruate to simulate and really feel what it means to have a menstruation. So it has electrodes on the lower abdomen that give cramps. It has a reservoir for blood in the back, and it's functioning. And as usual, Sputniko made the object, wore the object, and then also did a music video in which she is the boy, Takashi, that goes around Tokyo wearing the machine together with a girlfriend that tells him it hurts, doesn't it? So this whole way, a completely different form of design. You see also how many forms of design are here. You have speculative design in the case of Sputniko. You have product design in the case of the Ruby cup or the biodegradable pregnancy test. You have graphic design, communication design. So design in many different ways and also in different guises of activism. One of my favorites is Goat Man by Thomas Thwaites, in which he decided to get away from the hurdles of being a human and become a goat for 4 days. So he prepared really carefully with scientists, with engineers. He created these prostheses that enabled him to really move like a goat. And even he had this almost outsourced gastrointestinal system that enabled him to eat what a goat eats. And for 4 days, he decamped on the Alps with the goats, and the goats, as you can see, accepted him and he was with them. This was the kind of ending of the exhibition that talked about the empathy that is necessary if we want to try and repair these broken threads. It really is as old and as tried as the world. All you need is love. I mean, it's a little more complex than that, but all you need is respect. That would be more appropriate. So the ending of the exhibition was about empathy, not the kind of smoochy and hyper romanticized empathy, but very basic respect. And there were various examples of it. I was telling you about Forma Fantasma. Forma Fantasma does pretty much the same, the kind of activism that is based on respect. I told you before about the electronic waste market, but their most recent work is this exhibition at the Serpentine Galleries in London that is all about the industry of lumber, timber, lumber, wood, and this industry that is responsible for so much damage and so much criminality, but that in reality could be turned around. So it's a whole exhibition that tries to expose the underbelly of the wood industry and also to give some ideas on how to repair it. As Forma Fantasma always does, it's also visually thrilling, and it starts with this tragedy that happened in a valley in the north of Italy a few years ago, where after a freak storm, 60,000 or more beautiful trees were torn down. They were the trees that had been used in centuries to make the Stradivarius, the violins. So it was like an Italian patrimony. And this tragedy, which was absolutely natural, not human made, shocked the two designers to such an extent that they started studying the timber industry until they came up with this whole exhibition. And you see here, as designers, we always have the tool of form. Form is our most deadly weapon, because we can deploy it. It can be really attractive and graceful, or it can be punk, it can be brutal. It's our way in, and we need to learn to use it. Neri Oxman is, I want to make sure that let me see what time it is, because I don't want to hold you too much. I'm doing well. I'm going to kind of cut on Neri quickly. This is the exhibition that was at MoMA before Broken Nature. Neri is a very different kind of activist. She doesn't really speak openly about politics, but what she does is she tries to find new ways to build with nature. And as far as I'm concerned, that's politics too. Any way to live life in a society and with other beings and other species becomes politics, especially when you have to declare a certain stance or propose a way forward that involves also other people. So Neri has been working for 15 years, 20 years on finding ways to build with nature, to use chitin, pectin, and all those different materials that are present in nature overflowing, melanin, to work together with silkworms, to work together with bees and ants. This is one of her projects that was also commissioned for the Triennale that uses melanin. You can imagine melanin is the pigment that is so fundamental to so many different life forms, not only human beings, but flowers, insects, plants of all kinds, animals of all sorts, of all species. And it's omnipresent in nature. You can imagine what it would mean if we could find a way to have melanin in building facades. If buildings could darken when the sun is really, really high, and therefore re-maximize their energetic, their use of energy. It would be amazingly functional. But also melanin is at the basis of so much injustice and so much dark history of the world. So what you're looking at here is a monument. The whole project was started by a collaboration with the Mandela Foundation in Cape Town. And the idea was to have this monument that was almost a wailing wall using melanin on Table Mountain in Cape Town, facing the island where Mandela was imprisoned for so many years. So in a way, this kind of research that starts as very scientific and functional and opportunistic becomes also symbolically poignant in this particular case, as it does in many others. This is a picture of the exhibition, the way it was installed at MoMA. And what you see here is a pavilion that was made by 17,000 silkworms. There's also this idea, this subtle activism, that of trying to understand not only how silkworms behave, but also what silkworms want. And we know that interspecies is the final frontier. We pretend or we assume or we have the arrogance to say that we know what animals want, but in truth, we'll never know until they will be able to tell us and we'll be able to understand. Until then, there are all these different attempts that are as limited as we are as human beings to try and create conditions for nature to run its course with the oversight. We're not able to give up control and privilege and power, that's it, but the oversight of humans. So in this particular case, after studying together with her team of scientists, biologists, and engineers, after studying the behaviors of silkworms for years and years and years, she found a way to create conditions for silkworms to do their thing, which is to make their silk thread, to make it not in a cocoon, but rather linear without being disturbed, to not be boiled the way it usually happens in the silk industry once they've made the cocoon, but to let them die of natural death. And at the same time, create architectures that are fully organic in that they are just the way nature would make them. So time will tell if this is the right course, but I think it's always important to try directions that seem to be more copacetic with nature. And here we get to design emergency, our latest activism gesture. I say our because it's myself and Alice Rosthorn. I'm sure that you know Alice. She's the foremost design critic in the world. She is stunningly good. Her Instagram feed is more than a design encyclopedia. I don't even know what to tell you. If you're not following it, you're crazy. You should start following it right away. And she's also my great friend. I'm so lucky. So when the pandemic started and we were in lockdown, I was watching Fat Joe doing his Instagram lives every night. And I was thinking, I can do that, you know? So, and then I thought, Alice and I can do that. So I called Alice and I said, why don't we do this? And so in the span of like literally 5 days, we made it happen. We called our friend Frith Kerr, who's a great graphic designer. She came up with the identity, the logo, which is at the same time alert, but also very graceful. And we decided that we would every week interview one of the, I say one, but I mean, we put together Forma Fantasma, we kind of compressed them, the two of them and their dog in the little frame, but usually it was one person. People that had given a design response to the pandemic. Sometimes they were not designers. We also had an anesthesiologist, and we started out, for instance, with Alisa Eckert, who's an illustrator, together with Dan Higgins at the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, and she's responsible for designing the coronavirus that is all over the world. Because see, the coronavirus looks, I mean, it doesn't even look, but if you look at bottom left, that's what it kind of is. I say that you cannot say look because at that level of smallness, optics don't work anymore. You have to use an electron microscope that sends a flow of electrons that kind of touch the surface of the virus and then send back information to a computer that translates that data into an image. But so Dan and Alyssa were the ones that decided to make the S proteins red and mean, right? The S proteins are the ones that bind the virus to the cell. They are the ones that create the penetration and the invasion. So they made choices that made it so that this is the image of the coronavirus that we know all over the world. So it's the amazing power of communication design. And next to it here is another choice that we made. We interviewed Mark Dalton, who is the designer in New Zealand, responsible for what we considered the best campaign at the beginning of the lockdown to let citizens know how to behave during the pandemic, at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. So very much design examples, and in some other cases, not so well known, not really design examples. And then we also had some cases like this cover of the US deaths when they were nearing 100,000. I mean, to think that right now we're 267,000, it's amazing. But at that time, the New York Times decided to devote the whole front page and more just to names of people that had died. It was just so strong and so moving. And it's design. Design is powerful. We also were having double acts, Alice and I, we did one about hacking, one about communication. This one was about symbolism. This is the Italian housewife at 6 o'clock at night. We did it at 7 o'clock to greet all the first responders. There were kids making piñatas with the coronavirus. And then there was the symbolism of Delhi, for instance, all of a sudden clear blue skies, or the same was happening in Beijing, in Milan, everywhere. In Los Angeles, you could see the mountain ranges. So this whole symbolism of this strange, tragic, and hopefully unrepeatable moment. And you see, even though we were talking about really serious stuff, we were having a pretty nice time. This one over here is Alyssa. She's the designer of the COVID-19 virus. So you see, it was a way to once again speak about the versatility and the importance of design. This is Marco Ranieri, an anesthesiologist that was among the first to find a way to split ventilators. You might remember that at some point there were not enough ventilators to keep people alive, and he found a way. So a conversation with Marco that explained what it means to split the ventilators, what it meant to be in the thick of the tragedy that was happening in northern Italy at the beginning of the pandemic. And also, we tried to celebrate the power of design when it means trying to make people work better. This is a case in which the PPE, the protective equipment, was failing first responders so badly that this is the face of a poor nurse after her turn in England, showing really the scars of her dedication. So there was really a lot that we could highlight. We also talked about visualization design, showing, for instance, here, the index of vulnerability of different communities that Federica Fragapane, an Italian visualization designer, did for the Sergo Foundation. And in other cases also, we showed many different facets, to the point that Wallpaper Magazine asked us to guest curate the October issue, which I think you can still download for free online. And it was very funny because this all happened during lockdown. So we were photographed by a great photographer, Brigitte Lacombe, via Zoom. So basically we had her on Zoom in the computer, and then we were holding the phone like this, and she would tell us how to angle the phone, and then we took the selfie, right? So it was just like this incredible situation that we will look back at in years, and will be almost impossible to imagine again. So it was really quite an important period for design, and an important period also for the possibilities that design can express. And I think we should remember it. We should remember this adrenaline. We should remember, of course, the tragedy that so many of us have been through. I mean, I am among the lucky ones. I haven't, touch wood, lost anyone. I still have a job. I didn't get sick. I am so lucky. There are people that have had it much, much harder. But what I think is really important is to remember that we have the power to really be activists in many different situations. And we should always have that kind of attitude. I mean, we're not all made to be activists. If people want to instead make their own thing without engage, it's fine. But I think that if it's in your instinct to get your hands dirty in the world, please go for it, because there is always a design emergency. I kind of cut it short a little bit. There were a few more slides, but I think it's better to have a little time to talk. So here we are. I don't know how you want to moderate the talks. I think there are some things in the chat. How are we gonna do it? You're gonna just like raise your hand. I'll let Elspeth. Thank you, Elspeth, for the clapping. I'll let Elspeth moderate.
Sure. Anyone can chime in with a question, or if people would like to ask questions in the chat, I can read them out to you, Paula. So anyone who wants to jump in, go ahead.
Oh, I have the chat open too, so but just in general. Or you can also raise your hand. And can you raise hands in Zoom? I get confused now. There are so many different platforms. No question, people? I could have ended my slides. Okay.
I guess I have a question.
Oh, can you tell us how to access Design Emergency? Yeah, Instagram, design.emergency. So very simple. It's on Instagram, and all of the talks that we had are on our IGTV channel, so you can still access them. What is the next frontier for design? Well, as far as I'm concerned, there are many. The one that I'm dealing with is interspecies. I'm trying to see really if there's a way to understand how to design for everyone, but there are many others. I mean, I'm sure that Alan could also come up with several. It could be also how to get involved in government, how to really give design the stature that it deserves, you know, like publicly. Do you feel design activism should and could be taught in schools? Definitely. I think it's already happening. I think that you're doing it on your own quite a bit. I can bring also other examples. The Design Academy Eindhoven started a course in geodesign, which is all about like geopolitics. It's about how to really approach design so that it speaks to these reverberations and geopolitical consequences. I think that it really depends on different schools. Design education is a big deal and very complex. And I think that this is worth of like days of conversations. But the truth is that maybe now is a better moment to teach design activism, but at the time where everybody was finding a job at either IDEO or McKinsey or wherever else, it was not working because everybody that went to design school just wanted to get back their investment by finding a job immediately that paid a lot of money. Design activism doesn't pay much. But since right now, but it's much more meaningful. But so maybe right now, because of the difficult situation that we're all in, self-initiated enterprises are more viable, perhaps, than this kind of like blue chip jobs. So maybe it's a better moment for design activism. What do you think, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, there was this great quote, now I remember it was from Forma Fantasma on your IGTV, and I think they said that the result of a good education is that you're unemployable, that it's not just skills.
Well, that's a little romantic too. I mean, you can have a good education and be employed.
They are amazing.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
maybe
but
I need to say with their accent, I think.
No, but you shouldn't equate design activism with unemployment. That's not right.
No.
But I think, you can be very, very employed, but maybe you're going to be employed by the UN or by the Surgo Foundation. And maybe you will not have a big bonus at the end of the year, but you know what? Your conscience will be so much happier. So I'm hoping that right now there will be much more impetus for that. But I think that design activism is taught, whether it's taught with a big banner that says here we teach design activism or not, it really depends on your professors and on your teachers. And I know the kind of roster of teachers that you have, so I can tell you are taught. So let's see. Do you have any recommendation for spreading design activism into everyday business practices? Where does that start? Well, as you saw from the Triennale, you don't need to have a banner and an Extinction Rebellion logo and just go into the world. You can do small things. I see little kids convincing their parents to do away, to not use anymore single-use plastics. That's activism. So, I mean, there's many different ways. So yes, you can bring it into your business practices. You just need to find the right form of activism and insert it there. So you drive it. Do you see yourself continuing the Design Emergency series? Yes. Alice and I are going to continue it because there is always a design emergency. And also, one thing that I haven't showed here, because I kind of cut it short a little bit, is that we have specials, right? Because it's not only the pandemic. So as I mentioned to you, there was the Black Lives Matter protests, and we had a beautiful interview with Titus Kafar, led by Zoe Whitley. And it's not in our IGTV channel because Zoe's telephone melted, just overheated, and everything disappeared. So unfortunately, it's not there. But Titus was the artist that did the cover of Time magazine with the Black Mother image. Then we had a special about the Beirut explosion, the Beirut blast. We had a special on the West Coast fires. We had a special on the elections, and right now we're doing interviews, and there will be more, but we're interviewing the people that will help us rebuild the post-pandemic world. So the most recent interviews are about, in a way, reconstruction, many different ways, from thinking of how to have collective experiences again with S. Devlin to, we interviewed A.L. Wiseman from Forensic Architecture about architecture and justice. So yes, we will continue. Yeah, definitely. One way our society is so poorly prepared for emergencies is that different companies within the response team don't know how to talk to each other. Any thoughts on how to fix that? Well, even in this case, I mean, I remember, this is not this pandemic, but I remember when we did an exhibition in 2011, it was called Talk to Me. And it was all about interaction, interface, and design and communication. And I remember that there was the example of a dashboard that had just been introduced in New York so that the fire department, the police department, they could all look at the same dashboard because they used to all speak, have different ways to get their information. So once again, that's engineering, it's design, it's interface. I'm making it simple, but interfaces really mean ways to communicate. Sometimes they're not graphic, sometimes they are based on language, but definitely that's where I see designers and linguistics experts, deployed where they're not usually deployed and making things much better. Oh, Ty, you're there? Ah, Ty, there are forms of design activism that pays too, absolutely. So Joy Roberts, I happened to be in New York City during the SAFE exhibition at MoMA, and I loved it. Thank you. It helped stoke my interest in design as a means to solve real world problems. Thinking about SAFE and your body of work since, can you share about the role of museums and curated exhibits in helping amplify the role of design in the world? Yeah, well, design exhibitions are seen by 300,000 people. That's a lot, but that's not much. Think about how many millions of people see movies when they're good, or even when they're bad sometimes. But I am always super proud, and these exhibitions remain in people's memory. What I think happens is that they leave marks. You know, for instance, there's an exhibition that I'm very proud of that's from 2008 that's called Design and the Elastic Mind, that I think helped create new pockets for design. So exhibitions make you really proud. They have some consequence, but boy, I would like to be able to speak to as many millions of people as a good musician does or a good filmmaker. So it has meant a lot of pride, but not enough, never enough. So what are your thoughts about online education in colleges and universities and design education? Well, we kind of talked about it, but I think that one of the biggest problems with design education, and now, Alan, you might kill me, is that I wish it could be free. It's not free anywhere in the world. I mean, I went to school for free. I mean, for $200 a year. I was in Italy. It was architectural school. It was a mess, but it was an exception. You know, now it's not like that anymore. Unfortunately, the fact that governments and public institutions have decided to drop culture to its own destiny and not fund it anymore, I think it's really, really bad. I think that nurturing culture is really something that governments should take care of, but the world is going in the opposite direction. So unfortunately, this is how it is. And so I hope that there will be some safety nets for designers so that when they go to school, they don't feel that their main concern must be to repay students' loans, you know, because that's what's happening all over the world right now. Do you agree, Alan? You're going to be mad at me?
No. This is the one thing
Okay.
I cannot change, actually.
I know. It's terrible.
You know, it's a huge challenge,
Yeah,
particularly
I
in
know.
this country. I grew up in Canada, and my
Yeah, so you
education was
too.
so affordable compared to the education here.
So let's see. Then listening to your lecture really takes me back to the time last year having your class. My question is about COVID design emergency. Since Asian Americans are facing increasing discrimination during this time, oh boy, I know. Is there room for design around this topic in case of design emergency? Very interesting. We hadn't thought about it. We'll definitely look into that. But it's something that you should also think of as a topic. It's really important. I wouldn't even know where to start, but this is definitely a design emergency. So thank you for bringing it up to me. I will definitely think about it. Did I forget anything or anyone? Ti, do you want to tell people about your experience? No, let's see. No, we're all good. Oh yeah, that was Joy. Okay, I think
Actually, maybe people can turn on their video camera. It might
yes,
be a
yes.
little nicer.
And
we can also take a group shot at
and
some
you
point.
and you can also ask questions live, unless you tell me when it's too tiring. There are 2 more messages.
No. It'd be nice to have some voice questions.
So
Absolutely.
Katie Yolapwan, do you want to ask your question alive?
Sure.
Thank you.
It's amazing that you said my last name correctly the first time.
Sorry, what?
Oh,
yeah.
Last name. Good job. Yeah, so I think during this time we saw more exhibits move into a virtual realm. And I think that was great in terms of being able to expose a lot more people to the exhibits that they wouldn't have been able to before. But the thing I'm still realizing is that that information is still being circulated within the same groups that like visit museums in person. So I'm wondering, how do we like expose, like how do we provide the virtual experience to people who who don't know anything about museums, and like how would that affect the role of curator?
You're so right. And it's so hard for us to get out of our bubble, right? Because for instance, I'm not into poetry, so do I ever watch poetry? No, right? So, but maybe it would do me good. Now, that's why I've been at MoMA 27 years, and I've always wanted to stay there, even though I'm very often frustrated because, sometimes they don't understand the kind of design I want to do, blah, blah, blah. But I've always wanted to stay there because I'm sure that 80% of those people, or those 300,000 that see my show, are not there to see a design show. They're there to see Picasso, and then they stumble upon the show, right? And so all of a sudden they didn't know it, but they're getting their design education. And it's so hard. I mean, there are very few very few examples that really transcend and that jump over. And often it has to do with marketing. Like I'm thinking, for instance, I think that everybody has seen the Abstract series on Netflix, which in some episodes is fantastic, and other episodes it's like, why, right? Or for instance, the Helvetica movie, good by all means, kind of in a little slow perhaps, but those have a lot of marketing behind them. So I think that in most cases that I can think of, it is marketing, but not all. I mean, I'm trying to think that if in social media there's anybody that was able to jump across. I'll come up with some ideas, but I think it's almost impossible right now unless you use a Trojan horse of some sort. You pretend you're not, and then your design, like the MoMA way. I think at least. So who do we have here? Annie Robinson. Annie. Okay, I'm gonna read it then. Maybe Annie left. I've always wondered if professional design studios would hire applicants with a resume built entirely from trade work apprenticeship. I have no idea. I'm so sorry. That's something that I am not, that I really don't know. I think that this Alan might be able to answer you better than I would.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly hope so. I think the work is the work, the person is the person, and however you put together that body of work and that point of view as a person is what somebody is interested in partnering with, hiring with, funding, investing in. So yeah, I think any way that you find your way into the professional world is a great way. I don't think it just needs to be through a credentialed, design education.
Well, my dear ones, are you completely fried? But I hope this was hopeful for you. I think there's so much to be done right now. And I hope that I will have a chance to meet you, some of you at least, again in the spring. But in the meantime, if you have any leftover questions that you were too shy to ask in front of this threatening and really intimidating audience, please feel free to email me. Be patient, because as you know very well, online lives are busier and less structured than RL lives, and so sometimes it takes me a little longer, but I'll definitely answer. And if activism excites, it doesn't depress. Thank you. Yeah, I agree with you. And thank you all very much. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Elspeth. Have a good night or a good day, depending on where you are.